Hello, friends, and welcome to Spring at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We would love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
A reading from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. He picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water. He said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah? Where is he?" He struck the water again, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha crossed over. When the company of prophets who were at Jericho saw him at a distance, they declared, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." They came to meet him and bowed down to the ground before him. They said to him, "See now, we have 50 strong men among your servants. Please let them go and seek your master. It may be that the Spirit of the Lord has caught him up and thrown him down on some mountain or into some valley." He responded, "No, do not send them." But when they urged him to the point of embarrassment, he said, "Send them." So they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days, but they did not find him. When they came back to him, he had remained at Jericho. He said to them, "Did I not say to you, do not go?" Now the people of the city said to Elisha, "The location of this city is good, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful." He said, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it." So they brought it to him. Then he went to the spring of water and threw the salt into it and said, "Thus says the Lord, I have made this water wholesome. From now on neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." So the water has been wholesome to this day, according to the word that Elisha spoke. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head! Go away, bald head!" When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys.
Sometimes the Bible gets really weird. In the Bible, we encounter stories that seem so ridiculous and irrelevant to our modern world that we're often prone to disregard or even disparage them as irrational, mythological, incredible, or unbelievable. And some of these stories are strange because they defy the natural laws of creation or our reasonable assumptions of what's even possible. Like the story we encountered last week about a talking donkey who, as it turned out, possessed a keenness of insight, a depth of wisdom far beyond that of her harebrained, dim-witted cotton-headed ninny-mugging owner. That story is strange because we know that donkeys do not talk and cannot talk unless some very powerful magic mushrooms are involved. For a lot of people, when they read stories about a talking donkey or a burning bush or a runaway prophet getting swallowed up by a giant fish, it's like trying to understand someone who's speaking to you in a foreign language you've never heard of before, precisely because they're from a totally different planet. It's like the American couple driving through Canada one day. They don't really know where they are, so when they stop at a gas station to fuel up and the husband goes inside to pay, the wife says, "Ask the cashier where we are." And the husband walks inside, pays for the gas, and asks the cashier, "Where exactly are we?" And the cashier says, "Saskatoon, Saskatchewan." Puzzled, the husband walks back to the car and the wife says, "Where are we?" And the husband says, "I don't know. He doesn't speak English." Reading the Bible can be like that. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And then at other times, the Bible defies our sense of moral reasonableness. Like today's story about 42 youths who are mauled on the spot by two hard-hitting she-bears, all because they were mocking the prophet Elijah for his baldness. You'll find this story in the book of 2 Kings, but you won't find it anywhere in the children's illustrated Bible that you read to your kids before bedtime. Because how exactly are you going to explain a bear mauling massacre to a 5-year-old? It's another strange story in the Bible that defies our moral sensibilities and raises very serious questions about the love and justice of God. Why? Well, because for starters, we're talking about 42 teenagers getting mauled by bears simply because they're mocking a man about his baldness. I don't know about you, but as a teenager, I did some pretty harsh and thoughtless things back in the day. But after reading the story, I guess I had no idea that the consequences could be so severe. A bear mauling? Perhaps you're wondering, are we supposed to assume then that this bear mauling bloodshed was in some way endorsed, even willed by God? Another detail that makes this story strange is that it's about a prophet who's apparently so sensitive about his baldness that he feels compelled to curse these teenagers for their ridicule. I'm getting a little thin on top myself, so I'm sympathetic to Elisha's plight. Many of us have insecurities about how we look or what others think of us, but after reading this story, we're left wondering, couldn't Elisha have just been the grown-up here and taken the high road? Come on, Elisha. Lighten up. Maybe get a shrink. These were just kids. And again, we wonder, where is God in all of this? Is God okay with the unnecessary butchery of 42 otherwise foolish teenagers at the hands of a prophet of the Lord who really should know better? So this story isn't just strange. It's horrifying. It's appalling. And yet I found a handful of commentaries online this week suggesting that those 42 teenagers got exactly what was coming to them. In fact, one commentary said, quote, "The irreverence and lawlessness and hoodlumism of youth are sure to result in moral disaster." What? I mean, is hoodlumism even a word? Another commentary said these boys are the, quote, prototype for thousands of youths today. It said, only if they are educated at home, in school, and in church will they be able to avoid the punishment of the Lord. That will surely come in one form or another. Seriously? Divine punishment of children by bear mauling? I mean, that'll really fire up our kids to come to church, right? Just read this story, then take your kids to see that new movie, Cocaine Bear, and then just tell them, don't ever argue with me about going to church again. Don't do that, ever. Let me give you some helpful facts about this story that I think reveal what's really trying to happen and tell us in this story. First, these 42, quote, youths are not actually kids. And in Hebrew, the word interpreted here as small boys, it really means young men. And more specifically, young men who happen to be priests at a shrine dedicated to the worship of idols. The strange story takes place in Bethel. And at the time, Bethel was the site of a golden calf shrine constructed under the rule of Jeroboam I, Israel's first king of the northern kingdom. Idol worship, graven images like a golden calf, were prohibited for the Jews. Jeroboam wasn't exactly your model Jewish king. He had some idolatry issues. And so when Elisha shows up in Bethel and sees what's going on, this golden calf, what goes through his mind? I'm just speculating here, but I bet he's so shocked, he says, holy cow, what are you people doing? Worshipping a golden calf. And these young priests, they get a little defensive. According to the story, they say to Elisha, go away, baldy, get your bald head out of here. And the priests do not want the prophet walking into town and exposing their idolatry. So it turns out these so-called young boys aren't actually kids. They're fiercely dedicated priests of the infamous shrine dedicated to idol worship. Another helpful detail is that Elisha probably isn't an unfortunate victim of male pattern baldness. He's not a hair club for men candidate. He is bald, but why? An important detail, we know that Elisha's mentor, the most revered prophet in Israel's history, has just died. His name was Elijah. And Elijah was the greatest of all prophets. If Judaism had its own version of Mount Rushmore, it would bear the images of Israel's three most formative figures, Abraham, Moses, and Elijah. Abraham was the forefather of Israel. Moses was the lawgiver of Israel. And Elijah was the prophet of Israel. But in our strange story, Elijah has just died. And as he lay dying, Elijah passes his mantle to his young apprentice, Elisha. Elisha would now become the new Elijah and carry on his master's work. But before doing so, Elisha would mourn the loss of his mentor and friend. And part of his ritual of mourning included shaving his head. So Elisha's so-called baldness wasn't some physical defect for which he was embarrassed or ashamed. It was a sign of ritual mourning as he honored his fallen mentor and friend. One last important detail in this story. Elisha never actually commands those two she-bears to maul the 42 priests. I think those bears just happen to be doing what bears are by nature prone to do. Bears, on occasion, will maul. This wasn't Elisha's doing. Elisha did curse them, but to curse someone was simply to pronounce God's judgment on them. A prophet's job was to give blessings and curses, to say, hey, you're doing a great job here, keep it up, God's super proud. Or to say, wow, you're way off track. Let's clean this up before God has to get involved. Who knows if the she-bears were God's way of getting involved? We do know this, the story doesn't say that. And so what if this story isn't a story about 42 kids or Elisha's baldness or two angry kid-mauling she-bears after all? What if it's actually a story about what happens in a community and to the people who live in a community when that community worships false gods and resists the purposes of God, when it forgets or neglects or even defies God's greatest hopes for that community and for the people who live in it. What if it's about a community that has lost its soul? What if it's a story about the collateral damage that happens and the lives that are in some way destroyed whenever a community drifts away from the love and shalom of God and the bonds of love and shalom that hold those people together? What if it's a story about the idols we are prone to worship in this world and how they always lead to suffering or destruction of people around us? I'm talking about the golden calves of money, power, busyness, self-interest, indifference, greed, addiction, partisan politics, Christian nationalism, discrimination, and toxic religion that shames and excludes and otherizes. Elisha was a prophet of love. He may have cursed those 42 priests, but it wasn't out of hate. In fact, centuries later, many people believed that Jesus might have been the return of Elisha, because Jesus was also a prophet of love, like Elisha, and the two were remarkably similar. Right after Elijah passed his mantle to Elisha visits a town where the water is bad. People were getting sick from drinking it. Women were miscarrying. The water wouldn't grow crops. And so Elisha performs a miracle of sorts, throwing salt into the spring, and the water becomes wholesome again. Elisha came to town, and the town became well. Elisha later visits this poor widow who owes this major debt and she can't pay it off. Elisha, by some miracle, transforms a jar of oil into an endless supply of it so that the widow could pay her debt and feed her kids. Elisha came to town. People got well. And the prophet of love came to Bethel. And the people of Bethel rejected that love. And it was the rejection of that love that in the end led to the suffering and destruction of people. I think that's the point of the story. Whenever we reject God's love by giving our loyalties to the golden calves of our world, the people around us will suffer. And we all become unwell. In Rwanda, there's a grim memorial to one of the most gruesome massacres of our generation. In April 1994, civil war broke out as Hutu extremists began systematically killing Tutsis and moderate Hutus. Over just 100 days, 800,000 people were killed in the worst incidents of genocide since the Holocaust. After the war, a memorial was established in the very church where over 5,000 fleeing Tutsis sought sanctuary from the violence of machete-wielding Hutus. Nearly all of them were massacred in that church. And today, the clothing of the victims hangs from the rafters, and the bones are lined solemnly along shelves, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, all to remind the world of the horrific events that took place there. It's a haunting image. But that memorial stands to remind all the world of what happens to a land that has lost its soul, when humanity drives away the presence of the divine from its community. Maybe this strange story about a bald prophet and 42 young people and 2 angry she-bears isn't so irrelevant or horrifying after all. Maybe it's meant to be a shocking, stirring wake-up call for us, a reminder that our work in this world is like Elisha's, to cultivate the presence of God, not just in our personal hearts and souls, but in the very soul of our community, and to remember daily that there are always forces of resistance to that presence of God. And then if you want to find and overcome those forces of resistance, if you want to transform them with acts of love like Elisha did, you have to go where the suffering and pain and collateral damage is. Just look for the she-bears, the forces of violence and hate and pain. 4 years ago next week, over 2,000 kids from our local community here filled this sanctuary for a vigil to mourn and pray after 2 students shot 9 of their peers in a classroom. One of those was one of our own St. Andrew members. Throughout that entire week, St. Andrew served as the crisis center for our whole community. Counselors and students, parents, educators, law enforcement personnel, they all filled every room on this campus. And they were all in various ways victims of the forces of resistance to God's love and shalom in this world. I still hear from people in our community almost every week. And they tell me that in the midst of that horrible week in May 2019, they found a depth of peace and healing. And they found the presence of God here. It's not so much that it happened here, but that there are still places in the world where it can and does happen. Only because there are still people in the world who believe that there really is a divine presence worthy of being cultivated and kindled for the world. Our world and the soul of our community would be diminished without those people, without those places, without you, without St. Andrew. We live in this age in which more and more people are chasing golden calves, and fewer people are acknowledging their need for a divine presence in their lives. But there are still places like St. Andrew and other churches where the presence of God is constantly being cultivated, and where the world's resistance to the love of God, the genuine shalom, is met with an equal force of faithfulness and grace. The golden calves we fashion and worship become the most powerful forces that always resist God's shalom. Only an equal force of love and grace can overcome them, and we are the bearers of that love and grace. And God is the source of it. It's why every year here at St. Andrew, thousands of people gather together to serve the community and the needs of our community through our annual Big Serve. It's one hopeful day of service, one more opportunity to go where the suffering is, to go where human needs cry out, where the possibility of shalom awaits our cooperation. In a world of golden calves, what are you doing to cultivate the presence of God in your community? Where and how can you cooperate and conspire with a divine presence that is working for love and shalom in our world? Our takeaways for today: when we give our loyalties to golden calves, our community suffers, and we all become unwell. Only an equal force of love and grace can overcome the resistance to God's shalom. And God is always waiting for our faithful cooperation.